Our main topic today, Wendy, which is revisiting the issue of deposits and refunds and what is actually legal in terms of the Consumer Protection Act. I mean, we've dealt with this before from the perspective of stores and returning goods and that kind of thing, but in particular today looking at educational institutions, and we've had a combination of some personal experience and some listener complaints to draw on. Wendy, would you like to just set the scene for us?
Yes, of course. So schools are legally precluded from imposing non-refundable deposits on parents who accept a place for their child for the following year and then later withdraw for whatever reason. But many of these schools, both state and private, do so anyway. They keep the entire sum. Some of the policy is if your child comes, will deduct that amount from the first fees, and others it's just a fee, an amount. It's just what you have to pay to secure your child, which place rather. So I wanted to know, so in the case of state schools, these schools act precludes it. In the case of private schools, so the Consumer Protection Act outlaws blanket policies around non-refundable deposits. There will be cases where if a child doesn't arrive at the first day of school and the school has outlaid funds or perhaps not being able to fill the place, and so will be out of pocket. But this business of you pay this money and you won't be getting it back at all, we will keep 100%, even if you give us ample notice of withdrawing the child. That is not. It's certainly not illegal. And you'll remember some years ago, I think it was pre-COVID, we had the Consumer Goods and Services Ombudsman join us to emphatically state that was most definitely the case. And so then I got thinking, well, you'll know why I got thinking about what happens in the university space. All my work has been done around school deposits, and when I did some extensive research online, and there were a lot of attorneys stating the same thing, but there was nothing about universities. And won't you explain what got us thinking about that?
Well, what got us thinking about it is the fact that I've just been through this process of varsity applications with my own daughter, and it was really interesting to see the difference in how the various institutions handled this. Okay, so first thing to say is I'm sure anybody who's been through this process knows different varsities, and even within the same varsity, different faculties and even residences make their offers at different times, and some of them only come right at the last minute, some of them do it far in advance, and some of them make an offer in advance with a request for a deposit to secure the place. And it gets quite difficult to manage, especially if your first choice is the last one you hear from. So do you, as a parent, you sit there and the child going, do you pay the deposit at the first place that made an offer so that you can bank it and know for sure you have a spot in the course you want to study? Or do you hold out for your first choice in the hopes it's going to come and then risk the possibility that an offer doesn't come and then you've got no plan B? And we're talking quite substantial sums of money here. So it's very, very stressful. And so I was chatting to Wendy about the experiences I've had. Now, my daughter was very lucky to receive offers from first Wits, then Stellenbosch, and then UCT for her chosen degree. But they came at quite vastly different times of the year. And in the case of UCT, she literally got the offer on the day the matric results came out. So we sat in the position of, okay, that first offer came through from Wits, Wendy. There's a quite substantial billed as a non-refundable deposit to be paid, and you go, okay, I think we've got to take it and bank it because this might be the only offer you get. And then a few weeks later, a second offer came in from Stellenbosch, and we're like, okay, that's definitely a better fit for our family because it's closer to us. So then it becomes, okay, now there's a request for a deposit for a place in residence. So you pay that. And then, then you sit and chew your nails until matric results day to get the offer you actually hoped for. But long story short, Wendy, Stellenbosch, I have to pay tribute to Stellenbosch University's terms and conditions were crystal clear in all communications. Every document we were sent had dates. If you withdraw before this date, there is the refund is the deposit is refundable minus a set percentage cancellation fee or whatever it was. If it is a month later, it's a slightly higher fee. And your last point of being able to apply for deposit is X date. After that, there is no deposit. So very, very clear. And they stuck to it. When we did then apply for a refund, we were refunded very promptly. And in fact, no penalties were imposed at all. So that's the first one.
I have to say, Yeah, I only have experience with my daughter at Stellies, and I remember all that being set out, and the discussion, which is correct, around you will get this much back if you cancel then, except that's how deposits are supposed to work, with
Yeah.
terms and conditions and a sliding scale. And of course, she did take up the thing, the position, the place, and it was irrelevant. But I wasn't aware that in my small experience that there were some universities that, as you experienced, say, well, you pay your money and you won't be getting it back under any circumstances, no matter when you pull out.
And that was the case with Wits. And I was sad to say it. I'm a Witsie myself and a very proud one. I had a fantastic education there, and I'm very, very pleased to have had it. But yeah, very different experience. Firstly, the communication didn't mention anything about refunds until, if pushed on the one residence deposit, there was a concession that yes, it would be refundable if you didn't take up a place. But there was a fee deposit requested in October already, Wendy, and it was described as a non-refundable deposit, which would then be offset against your fees if you stayed at Fitz. But it didn't say anything about what would happen if you didn't choose to take up that place. And when I mentioned to Wendy that it was phrased as a non-refundable deposit, red light went off and Wendy said, hang on a second, that's not consistent with the Consumer Protection Act, which is what made me then start navigating the refund request process. And it was one of these systems where it's all online, a so-called self-help portal. Tried very hard to navigate it, Wendy, for about 6 weeks of follow these steps, but the steps that we were told to follow weren't actually available on the site, and backwards and forwards of emails, and just a very frustrating experience. And after nearly 6 weeks of trying, weren't any closer to getting a refund. At which point you intervened, Wendy, and I'm so grateful you did, because you've really got the ball moving. Won't you just explain to us how you got involved?
Okay, well, I did what I do. I sent a media query to the university's communications team, and I must say all their names and contact details are very clearly displayed on Witz's website, which is not always the case. So that was a good start. And I queried this so-called non-refundable deposit policy. And, the fact that some deposit payments are credited to the student's account should they take up the place while others are not. And I'm talking about from between universities is not always the same practice. And I did say I know that it is fairly common practice. The amounts that I got, it was a 2018 report, was ranging from 500 Rand to 5,000 Rand. So quite substantial in many cases. I pointed out that non-refundable deposits are outlawed by the SA Schools Act, and the Consumer Protection Act outlaws blanket no refund deposit policies, as we've said. So, and also, if an institution suffers a loss due to a person not cancelling an advance booking, it has to be quantified, that the admin costs incurred, the loss of income due to having refused the place to someone else, etc. And with universities, they usually are oversubscribed, right? Yeah. They're not going to suffer a loss. They just go to the person on the next on the list. So we're not talking about them being out of pocket here. Let's be very clear. There was no loss suffered. So I said, the legislators feel very strongly that withholding 100% of the deposit in every case was an injustice to the consumer. So I asked, in a case such as your daughter's, Pippa, how is the withholding of the entire 3,000 Rand deposit justified? It can be viewed as enrichment. I mean, because the university suffered no loss. So the response from Witz's senior communications officer, Zuma, went like this. The matter has been escalated to the university's registrar. The registrar or her nominee will reach out to the student in order to resolve this issue. We've noted the frustrations expressed by the concerned parties, and it is our intention to bring this matter to a close as soon as possible. We've taken your concerns into account, and we will be engaging internally in respect of the issues you raised regarding non-refundable deposits.
Okay, and act promptly they have, Wendy, because I got that phone call this morning, I have to say, shortly after 8 o'clock from the registrar's office saying, please send us your bank details. You are owed the deposit refund and it will be made. So thank you very much. And I must say, all handled with great politeness and empathy on their end once I finally got hold of a human being. I think that was 3/4 of the problem, that engaging with, and we've spoken about this before so often, Wendy, that computer interface. When you're not getting anywhere, you need to be able to step out of the computer cycle and speak to a human being that you can explain the anomaly to. And when that finally happened with your help, it all got resolved. So thank you for getting involved. And I would be very interested to hear from listeners, because obviously we now have a sample of 2 here.
We have a precedent
I'd be interested to hear what your experiences were with your own children, whether you were applying for high schools or for university places. Were you asked to pay deposits that were not refundable? If you challenged it, did you manage to get your money back? If you hadn't challenged it, I hope you, listening to this conversation, know that you have the right to ask for at least some of it back. And again, Wendy, in fairness, I would have been happy for some sort of percentage to be deducted as an admin fee for the time spent processing an application that in the end was not taken up. But I think that would have been fair, but certainly not the whole amount. As you say, that place has most certainly been filled by another student. So I'd love to hear our listeners' experience on this one. And hopefully they'll take on board what you've pointed out to them about the law of the land, Wendy, and put something formal in place to make sure that their policy is consistent with the law.
Yes, it should be a sliding scale, and clearly, they were required to. There was some admin involved in your daughter's application and the letter that they sent out, their response, etc. But a small admin amount, keeping 3,000 rand is never going to be justifiable. And of course, there'll be some people listening, I'm sure, who paid that deposit as well, in respect of their children, and would be entitled to a refund. So let's hope. I think they just rely on parents not pushing back on this,
or not knowing that they have the right to push back. Yeah.
Exactly. So, interesting one.
We now look at schools. And as you said at the start, Wendy, the Schools Act actually speaks directly to this issue, that you cannot ever withhold a deposit in full. That it's that policy of saying you pay the deposit and that's it. You walk away if you walk away with nothing back. That is the red flag here. So let's get back to schools. And I'm sure that's that our listener case study you've dealt with isn't the first one you've had come your way, Wendy.
No, not at all, Pippa. So, as you say, many schools, state and private, do it anyway. And I think, as with the universities, a lot of parents don't realize that it's not allowed for in various bits of legislation. The argument that the schools use to justify it is that, a lot of parents put their names down in multiple schools and then withdraw at the 11th hour. But, legalities aside, in most of these cases, they are able to fill all available spots. So there is no financial loss, quite the opposite, in fact. So I recently dealt with a case involving a prominent so-called Model C school in Durban. Charmaine emailed me. She wanted to enroll her daughter for grade 8 at the school. She was an old girl of the school. The family lives in the area, and the child attended the school's main feeder primary school, right? So she was told as early as March or April, to pay a deposit of 3,500 rand to secure the child's spot. So she did so in April with a credit card, and she was told that it would go towards the first term's fees. But it subsequently transpired that, speaking to the primary school's HOD, they said, not sure the child, the girl, would cope with such a large school. She had some anxiety issues, and she was more suited to a smaller school environment. So in mid-November, Charmaine took that advice to heart, and she told the school, and she asked for her deposit back, at which point she got a very terse response to the effect that the deposit was non-refundable. Have a good day further. I remember the email ended after that bad news. She said, I tried to ask for at least half back under the circumstances, but that email was ignored. The school would have received a deposit from the next student on the waiting list, Charmaine said, while we received nothing in return, not even an email to say that they will discuss our request with the school's governing body. So I took up the case very recently with the school's finance department, stating the legal position and asking how they justified their policy. And I got a very short response saying that in order for us to facilitate our grade 8's orientation program, our service provider requires a non-refundable payment upfront, and name and middle badges are pre-ordered. No amounts were mentioned, but then she added that they will refund her half, that 3,500, which was 1,750 rand. There was no discussion around the policy of non-refundable deposits, the legalities, or anything like that. So I wrote back and said, okay, but you do owe the full deposit back. I said, because I've seen a letter to prospective parents where they are asked to pay prospective grade 8 parents, that is, they were asked to pay an additional sum on top of the 3,500 Rand non-refundable deposit, just over 2,000 Rand by the end of January this year, which would cover team building as well of 1,665 Rand, as well as 90 Rand for the 2 badges that the girls wear on their dresses.
So they weren't part of the 3,500 Rand?
No, they weren't. And Charmaine didn't pay that amount because she had given the school notice that her daughter wouldn't be starting grade 8. So I put it to the school very diplomatically that the deposit of 3,500 Rand did not appear to have had anything to do with the payment for orientation events or badges. And even if they had, the school would have been required to produce invoices. Makata Mpahlele, the Ombudsman for Consumer Goods and Services, is very emphatic on the point that with any withholding of parts of a deposit, they can't be thumb sucks. It has to be there have to be invoices that say this is what we spent on the badge, this is what we paid over for your orientation, and fair enough, then absolutely withhold that money. So the response number 2 was I was copied in on an internal instruction to make the balance of 1,750 Rand payable to Charmaine's bank account and addressed directly to me. Our payment run is on Friday, the 3rd of March. So that money has been refunded in full. So I've had quite a good run with
You've had a good run of luck. It has to be said that the school appears to have been a lot less diplomatic and polite in its correspondence to you than Fitz were, Wendy. They're clearly feeling that they've been poked in the wrong place.
Exactly. And, it's just, I use these case studies because I know, especially at this time of year, well, possibly from January more like, there would be a lot of parents who very recently, should we say, would have been made to forfeit quite a hefty deposit amount, whatever it's called, a reservation fee or whatever it is, an upfront payment asked by a school that they then tell you is non-refundable when your child does not attend. You give them notice, before the end of the previous year. That is not justifiable. So, yes, schools need all the money they can get, raise it in other ways, but this sort of enrichment is absolutely not legal, and nor I venture to say is it justified.
So just to emphasize again, Wendy, important to say that they're entitled to ask for deposits, and you are entitled, obviously, to change your mind and withdraw your place. And I think if they can provide proof that they haven't refilled that place, there's a different argument to be made. But
totally.
But given what we know about the pressure on schools, I mean, if a school can come to you and say, well, you were going to be one of a class of 20, and here on the 1st of January is our class list, you can see there are only 19 kids attending, we couldn't find another 20th. That's a different scenario from knowing that there's a waiting list of another 50 kids waiting to take that place.
Yes, and also most reasonable parents would be very open and amenable to the idea of the school deducting
something,
an admin fee, a few hundred Rand even, and let that go to the school. 500 Rand, I think, it would be still enrichment. It wouldn't have cost them actually 500 Rand, but it's a lot of admin on their part. There are all these applications, so fine, and they've got to then refund, which is more admin. But, more than that is
not justifiable. Yeah. And not compliant with the law either. So now you know what your rights are. You have this podcast to help in your defense if you're trying to argue it with anybody. And let us know if you're having difficulties around that issue. Wendy, thank you so much for this important reminder. As you say, it's quite substantial sums of money at a time where there are a lot of additional costs at the start of the year as well.
Yes. And just to reiterate, state schools may charge a deposit but can't withhold all of it. But according to the SA Schools Act, the state schools may not charge it in the first place.
At all? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, at all.
So, that's important to remember as well. So you're quoting both the Consumer Protection Act and the Schools Act.
Lunch with Pippa Hudson
on CapeTalk.